Hello there folks, my name is Spoonks and I saw Mean Girls and I didn't really like it. I love the original Mean Girls. I'm one of those people who thinks it's one of the greatest movies ever made. Everything about that movie is pretty much flawless in my opinion. It just stuck the landing. It was able to capture lightning in a bottle. I love everything about that movie. And I was pretty curious about a new iteration of Mean Girls, with this being a musical. I was wondering how they could turn a teen comedy into a musical like this, and the trailers looked a bit promising to me. A lot of the jokes worked. It seemed like they were gonna bring Mean Girls into the new generation in its own unique new way. But unfortunately, I was very disappointed by this film, as it did not live up nearly to the heights of the original or even my modest expectations. I don't think it's terrible, but I didn't think it was good either. Starting with my positives, I thought the musical numbers were really well done. They were really well choreographed, really well put together, and a lot of creativity and fun, and the most amount of energy and passion seemed to come out from these big musical numbers. They really stuck the landing on making these sequences stand out and being the most fun, entertaining parts of the movie to me personally. And I will also say that at least half of this movie is funny. The other half isn't, and we'll get to that later. But I think the movie really works and is the funniest when it's trying to be its own thing, when it's offering us some new jokes, whether how it plays up with the musical styles or just some of the new ways they bring Mean Girls into this generation. I think with the way, like technology and how teens act now, I think that offered some of the best and funniest jokes in the movie. And I did laugh a handful of times, to say the least. Not nearly as much as the first film, but definitely enough. I will also say that the performances here were all very well done, but the standouts for me were Renee Rapp as Regina and Jaquel Spivey, I hope that's how you pronounce it, as Damien, and even Busy Phillips, surprisingly, as Regina's mom. I was not expecting to like her as much as I did, but these three stood out. They were the perfect casting, and they made the most of their screen time. They understood the assignment and had some of the best lines, the best scenes. Every time all three of these actors were on screen, I couldn't get enough of them. They were just so perfect, and they really nailed the performances, as did everyone else, but those three in particular really stood out to me. And now on to my negatives with this movie. Look, I haven't seen the Broadway version of Mean Girls, so maybe it's better than this. Maybe this suits the stage better than it does the big screen, but I'm sorry, I just don't think Mean Girls works as a musical, really. Again, I could be wrong. Maybe the Broadway version does this better, but from what I could tell with this movie, it just doesn't fit the musical format for me, really. A lot of the songs are just excuses to spout exposition and explain things that the original movie took like a couple seconds to explain and then move on. But when it comes to these songs, they take up so much of the movie and have to explain so little and so much that it becomes exhausting at a certain point. It also doesn't help that I didn't really care for a lot of the songs. I thought the musical numbers that accompanied them were great, but the songs themselves I thought were very forgettable, really. The only ones I can remember are the one that played at the end credits, the Regina George introduction song, and the one at Halloween. Those were the only ones that really stuck out to me, really. But back to how the songs affect the story, there's just so many of them and so much time is put into these that it causes a lot of the key character moments and plot points in the original Mean Girls to be very much tossed aside and even rushed at certain points. They change a lot with how the original story is structured. Some things happen much earlier in this film than they did in the other one, and even some certain big moments in the original take place during a song, which I found to be weird. There's this big moment in the original film involving Katie and Regina, but in this movie it all happens during a song, and you can't really pay attention to it because this big lavish musical number is going on while this is taking place, and it doesn't really gel well and makes you question what is the point, really. This movie is also not very funny, unfortunately. Half of it is, but the other half, oh boy, there are a lot of stinkers. A lot of the jokes just fell very flat for me. It just didn't have the edge or the bite that the original Mean Girls had. It felt very sanitized and too clean for a movie called Mean Girls, and the jokes especially reflect that. A lot of these just felt very awkward and just didn't really have the comedic timing or the wit of the original Mean Girls humor. And lastly, I will say that while I did enjoy the performances, the characters in here just felt so underdeveloped in a lot of senses. Like, a lot of these characters don't really have much to do, as the spotlight is on all of the musical numbers. It takes just too much, and the characters suffer because of that. Katie feels like a secondary character in the movie, pretty much, as more focus is put on Janice, which I found interesting, but not in a good way. Regina isn't even in the movie all that much, and they set up something with Gretchen, but that never comes into play after it's brought up, and it just felt very messy and underhandled with how the characters are worked into this movie. So yeah, unfortunately, Mean Girls is a pretty big disappointment for me. I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's horrendous. But given the fact that I love the original, I was super let down by this movie. Even though the musical numbers themselves were very well done and easily the highlights of the film, I loved some of the performances, and half of the jokes were really funny. The story felt secondary, the characters felt secondary, a lot of the jokes miss, and the songs themselves weren't even that memorable. As a fan of the original, I can't really recommend checking this out at the theater. I honestly kind of understand why it was originally intended for Paramount Plus, but if you are really, really, really curious about seeing this movie, I'd say watch it at least once so you can at least make some comparisons and see where you stand on which one you prefer. And as for everyone else, I tell them to just wait till it drops on Paramount Plus. I can't really recommend going checking this out at the theater. It was just not that good enough to warrant a trip to the theater, unfortunately. Or if you want to see Mean Girls done good, you always have the original. You can always just watch that again, as I'm probably never going to watch this one again. And those were my thoughts on Mean Girls. What did you all think of it? If you've seen it, did you like it? Did you hate it? Comment down below and let me know. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this channel, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on all the social media links at the end of the video. And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.
It's not my fault. You came with her, but she might leave with me. It's not my fault. You gotta pay for what I get for free. It's not my fault. Yeah, like you love with me. It's not my fault till I can love with me. No, you're like in love with me. Where she at? What she doing? Who she with and where she from? Oh, she's this, oh, she's that. She's a flight risk on the run. She's back, she's back.